G'day mate, 40 here. Just read a great column by Megan McArdle in the Washington Post. She's a centrist, perhaps center-right, never Trumper. And she talks about how disinformation and misinformation experts should be playing a valuable role in our public discussions, but because they are so often partisan, that they destroy their credibility. So remember, before the 2020 election, disinformation experts said that the Hunter Biden laptop was likely Russian disinformation, and 41 national security experts, approximately 41, signed off on a letter saying this bears all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Social media censored reports of Hunter Biden's laptop, and this all turned out to be bogus. And when the disinformation experts descend on a story and it turns out they were wrong, turns out they're almost always wrong in a predictable, partisan, left-wing manner. So remember videos showing Joe Biden's senility, that these were deep fakes, misleading. It turned out that the videos were expressing a deeper truth than what most of the experts were seeing and saying. And then you had disinformation experts trying to prevent Elon Musk carrying on a conversation with Donald Trump, which just destroys the credibility when they could be performing a valuable service. All right, correcting falsehoods, right, is a valuable service. They could be making public discourse better, but because they are so predictably partisan, the term misinformation, disinformation is a dirty word on the political right. And this all springs from Brexit. Britain's voting for Brexit in 2016 and then the election of Donald Trump. And the elite consensus was that there's no way that the people could have done this without foreign interference or disinformation. And that springs from mistaken belief that people evolved to be gullible. All right? The perspective that we did not evolve to be gullible is so useful. So instead of dismissing developments and attitudes and policies and beliefs and remarks that we don't like as expressions of gullibility, right, we steel man these statements and try to see how they could be expressing a truth. I like the opening comment that Big Guy made in my chat last night, that I treat every event as supporting one of my pre-existing hypotheses. It's a very good, valid criticism. But I don't know who does it better, right? Who of people in my genre doesn't look at events through the framework of their own pre-existing hypotheses. So I dated this Filipina girl for about a year, and she embarked on a conversion to Judaism. And one of the things that disturbed me about her was that she was bad at reading social cues. So here is a rule that I have for my dating life. Right? I'm not interested in dating women who are less astute at reading social cues than I am, because women should be more astute than me. Right? I am often way too oblivious. Right? I often live in an abstract world of thinking about ideas and topics that I want to live stream about, and I miss out on social cues. And so any woman who is worse than me at reading social cues, right, that's not a good fit for me. And it's rare. I'd say fewer than 1 out of 10 women that I did Google him. So I was dating this Filipina girl, and she drove out to a synagogue on Friday night, and her car was filled with her belongings because she was living out of her car. And so the rabbi, who she wanted to sponsor her conversion, insisted that she had to sign up for therapy. And I think that's also been a precondition, I think, for at least one of my stages in my Jewish journey. I think that, if I recall correctly, the rabbi insisted that I get that I get into therapy. My God, I must have been a handful. I've taken a little perverse pride that so many of my teachers and probably so many of my rabbis found me more challenging than anyone else they'd ever dealt with. And I took a perverse pride in this as I'm an independent thinker. But I think most of the reason that I was so challenging is that I simply had undiagnosed, untreated ADHD. I'd like to think that medicated, my ADHD medication are much less challenging, because if someone is needlessly challenging and you have to deal with them, it's exhausting and that hurts you, right? People who take energy from you, who sap you, who take up a lot of bandwidth, they are hurting you. So it's not a good thing to be going around hurting innocent people by demanding so much of their attention and bandwidth, and they're kind of stuck with you as a teacher or a rabbi or a preacher or a boss. It's not a good quality to have. So one of the ways that my Filipino girlfriend was bad at reading social cues, and she's the only girlfriend I know of that has died. She died a few years ago. Christine was her name. One example of how she was bad at reading social cues is that I never talked to her about converting, right? We just fell into bed together. And then she took it on herself to start a conversion program. But I only I didn't only, but the synagogue that I primarily attended was Orthodox, but she went off and got started in a conservative conversion program, which is not going to cut it in Orthodox Judaism. So it was a bad misreading of social cues. Another thing is that she wanted to take her laptop into Orthodox shul on Friday night so it doesn't get stolen from her car. Right? You don't bring a laptop into an Orthodox shul on Shabbat. And then she worked at a public radio station. When we were walking with friends, she'd encourage them to call in and donate during their pledge drive. But she also had some funny insights into me. So she was once at a Shabbat lunch, and the host of the lunch, a rabbi, was talking about what a beautiful community they have. But there are some people that my girlfriend needed to watch out for, and then he named me. Because I'd published something about he was a rabbi at a Jewish day school, and he was often hitting on the female students there and propositioning them and inviting them over for one-on-one Shabbat dinners when his wife was out of town. So he didn't appreciate that reporting. And it was also a little awkward because we went to the same synagogue. So I left his name out of my reporting. And I remember on Yom Kippur, he walked over to me and thanked me for leaving his name out of it. But after he went on a diatribe about me at this Shabbat dinner, my girlfriend at the time blurted out, well, he's okay when he's on his lithium, but he often goes off his lithium because he's too vain about the weight loss, about putting on the weight. Lithium tends to bloat you. And it's true. I enjoyed the calming, moderating effects of lithium, but I didn't enjoy the weight gain and the drooling and the metallic smell that it would give me. Bro, where's the video? Oh man. That sucks. What the hell? We're back. Thank you. Damn, so when someone calls me, then my video automatically freezes up. but it's the ideas, right? It's the wisdom, it's the philosophical insights, it's the moral encouragement, it's the spiritual ecstasy that I convey with my words that truly matters, right? Surely you have moving pictures now in high definition color. So we only lasted so long because we took up chess. About 6 months into our relationship, she suggested that we start playing chess, and then I started checking out all these books from the library on how to play chess, how to get better at it. And 6 months of chess kind of took the place for our non-existent love life. Anyway, so different groups have different habits, and I remember taking her to Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, and my Filipina girlfriend, who was quite cute, right? She had cheerleader looks. She'd minored in Latin, so she was cute and smart, just lacking in common sense and lacking in awareness of social cues, and tended to get into way too much interpersonal drama and feuding. But when we'd go to these events, such as the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books at UCLA, she would sit on the ground like way too easily. It just came quite naturally for her. And I tried to tell her, look, white people don't do this. So remember I referenced, right, are you guys seeing live pictures now? Oh, audio and video. Now we can again vicariously experience the lives of the affluent. So I tell her, white people don't sit on the ground like this at public events. And when you're with me, I have the power to bestow upon you the status of honorary white, because much of America is so favorably predisposed towards Asians that essentially treats them as honorary white people. But she kind of resented this. But remember that National Geographic article I referenced yesterday? For almost a century in California, much of the West, there were ugly laws that would discourage people who were horribly maimed or diseased from walking down public thoroughfares. The main purpose of the laws apparently was to reduce numbers of beggars and people who had fake diseases and disabilities and handicaps to try to beg for money. And the National Geographic, which has become quite woke, was outraged. And it's understandable why people would get outraged at laws against ugly people walking on public thoroughfares. But what struck me is there's no consideration for the welfare of the community. Right? So National Geographic was saying that modern versions of laws against ugly people on public thoroughfares are laws aimed at discouraging people from sitting down in public thoroughfares or lying down. So if you walk around a lot of streets in Los Angeles, you have all sorts of people sitting on the streets, drug addicts, passed out. And so it makes sense to me that a community that wants to maintain its civilization, right, has to put up standards that are going to have a discriminatory effect, that are going to have the capability of cruelty, because you don't want people sitting and lying down on sidewalks. I mean, what about the great intellectuals who are pouring out their heart and soul on a live stream? They shouldn't have to dodge people sitting and lying on streets when they are transmitting, life-giving wisdom. So in California and on the West Coast, we've gone way too much in the other direction, where there's just so much of an insistence on the rights of homeless people and drug addicts and the antisocial that we have destroyed community, diminished the public good, reduced public safety. Right? New York was doing so good at cracking down on crime, but then they stopped cracking down on fare evaders in 2019, and stopped enforcing broken windows policing, and as a result, had this massive increase in crime and a decrease in the common good and public safety. So back to my Filipino girlfriend. Yeah, so obviously some groups are much more at ease at sitting down on a public sidewalk than other groups. And when you enforce standards of public propriety, and who has more public propriety than me? I am foregoing the use of a gimbal because it's disturbing to people. When I walk down public streets and I've got my iPhone on a gimbal, right, it freaks people out. So I give you an inferior moving picture so that I'm less disturbing to the peace and quiet of the community. Right? There's nothing weird about walking down a street talking into a phone, and so people don't find it nearly as off-putting, discomforting, disturbing. And so I will sacrifice the technical quality of my live stream, right, to preserve the public good. Not a piece of litter. How much vibrant diversity are these residents enriched by? We're near UCLA. What about the bum's freedom? Might have to bring this to the attention of Kamala. Yeah, the neighborhood looks pristine, so a lot of people think that LA is a hellhole. Well, does this look like a hellhole? Parts of LA are hellish, but even LA and throughout California, there's a substantial move back towards more law enforcement and cracking down on homelessness. So even the liberal Democratic governor of California, Governor Newsom, has encouraged cities throughout California to crack down on homeless encampments. And you have a proposition to return enforcement of laws against theft. So, first of all, California approved a referendum that made stealing up to $950 punishable by nothing more severe than a misdemeanor, which has led to a ton of public theft and the closing of a lot of stores. But now there's a pendulum swing back towards law enforcement and cracking down on homelessness and antisocial behavior from Democrats, right? This is a state controlled by Democrats, but even among Democrats, they're cracking down on homeless encampments, retail theft, and the like. So that which is unsustainable, such as the substantial increase in crime that we've had over the past 4 years, right, will eventually meet a strong opposition, even from the Democrats. I was listening to a great interview on Chris Williamson's channel. It's my new favorite channel, Modern Wisdom it's called. And he was interviewing marketing executive Rory Sutherland. This guy is just filled with ideas. And he was talking about how stimulating he finds the alt-right and how he regards himself as the most left-wing member of the alt-right. He had this idea that the right is correct for the long term, but left-wing policies are best in the short term. I don't quite remember all the different ways that that breaks down. But why is it that certain ideas can be tremendously stimulating for some people, and then those same ideas can lead to a downward spiral for others? So some people look into the alt-right and find it a benefit. It stimulates their thinking. It opens up discussion. It expands the Overton window. And it enhances the quality of their life. And then for other people, they discover the alt-right, and that begins a substantial downward spiral where they alienate themselves from their employer, from their educational institution, their community, their family, and their friends. And so I think the answer why certain ideas can be a benefit to some people and absolute poison for others is it's primarily about the individuals. So alt-right ideas generally primarily appeal to the socially marginalized. Some people who are socially marginalized are usually socially marginalized for good reason. They're losers. And so losers, when they attach on to an idea, they will use it to justify they're losing habits. And winners, when they interact with the same ideas, right, they will use them to enhance their winning. So as Big Guy commented on my live stream at the very beginning yesterday, that I see events through my pre-existing hypotheses, and yeah, I have a bias that life in California can be pretty sweet and can be improved. I have a bias that we are not doomed. The opposite perspective of John Derbyshire, who I believe published a book called We Are Doomed. And then other people like Kip, right? Kip calls in, and it's usually a fusillade of critiques about how we're essentially doomed. Come on, woman, what are you doing just hanging out in the middle of the street? Make a decision. And so I notice with critiques like Kip's, they're always critiques against a standard of excellence and perfection, rather than against what goes on in the real world. So I notice this with many critiques of the United States. It's holding America up against the standard of perfection, and America's always going to be flawed compared to a model of perfection. But there's no point comparing America to a standard of perfection. You want to compare America to other countries. Like, how does America's economy stand with regard to other countries? How does its military, its law enforcement, its institutions, its elite, how do all these things compare against what goes on in Japan or Nigeria or France? Yeah, the sky isn't falling. Yeah, this is YouTube, not YouTubing. Oh, thank you, Janitor Joe. You speak facts, very emotionally intelligent. Wow, I appreciate that. Hey, have you guys heard of the comic Andrew Schulz? So Rory Sutherland was praising the comic Andrew Schulz, and I became so intrigued that I stopped listening to the Rory Sutherland interview and tuned in to an Andrew Schulz comedy, and it was hilarious. Oh, here's one of his opening jokes that you don't want to expel your essence on the belly of a Latina woman, because her belly button will open up and suck in your essence and she'll get pregnant, right? You need to expel your essence on her back, and that's why Latinos are called wetbacks. God forbid. But why comedy works, why comedy is important, is that you get to say a lot of truths that are not polite, right? We don't tend to see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We imbibe all sorts of standards for polite discourse. And so outrageous things are happening all around us, but we won't point out what's going on for fear of social censure. And then we'll go to a comedy show and some comic will have the balls to stand up and talk about some painful part of reality, and we recognize it, and we just have the reflex of laughter. So I miss laughing. I don't think I've done a lot of laughing the last 5 weeks. So I'm incorporating more humor into my podcast listening to get that joy back, to start exercising those muscles. Man, but Rory Sutherland, he had so many ideas. God, wish I had a piece of paper where I had them written down right now, but I just started posting them onto my time. Oh, so one thing that he noted, that people who are speaking publicly tend to speak about the highest status ideas rather than about topics that they actually know something about. And he quoted Tom Sowell, that activists are useless people who are trying to feel important. And I thought, my God, that also aligns with a whole bunch of us live streamers. Useless people trying to feel important. And so Rory Sutherland's critique was, instead of talking about things you don't know much about, if you're going to talk publicly on a podcast, like, confine it to topics you do know something about. So if you're in England, all right, instead of talking about Black Lives Matter and events in American politics, right, talk about something closer to home that you know something about. And he talked about how many great big problems don't get solved by grand pronouncements, that they get diminished by working on little things. So I saw this in one of the self-help. I follow a handful of self-help marketers on Twitter. And one said, instead of just saving your best efforts for the big stuff, right, develop a discipline of doing everything with care and conscientiousness, and then that will feed back into your bigger decisions. So it's like in The Karate Kid, where the kid is getting schooled by the master, and his initial exercise is to just wax the master's car. And he gets mad, all he's doing is waxing the master's car, but the master eventually shows him, when you practice wax on, wax off, right, you're developing the moves that you need to be successful at karate. And let's go to the chat. We all have our own personal Overton window, and that falls outside of mine. Disavowing the joke. Yeah. And also, we all have our own personal Overton window, often depending on context. So that there will be jokes and topics that we feel free engaging in and enjoying in certain contexts, but not in others, with some people rather than with other people. My God, what did I put on my Twitter timeline this morning? I can't look at my Twitter and live stream at the same time, but there were just so many great ideas that I have to investigate. Oh, Megan McArdle pointed out that if you just let Donald Trump ramble, right, he appears just constitutionally incapable of sustaining ideas. And there is good reason to question if Trump can exercise the discipline to put substantial points together and to prosecute a case against Kamala Harris. Because if the election boils down to whether or not Americans like Donald Trump's going to lose. But if the election boils down to immigration, crime, inflation, then Donald Trump will win. And so Republican strategists are increasingly frenzied that Donald Trump does not appear constitutionally capable of exercising the sustained discipline to prosecute a case against Kamala Harris. And there's good reason to believe that Donald Trump has ADHD. And you saw the difference between the third debate against Hillary Clinton in 2016, where he's apparently on something like Adderall, and therefore is much more disciplined, as opposed to his first two debates where he's just all over the place. Trump's performance has been so shambolic over the past month that it appears to many people that he isn't even trying to win. I remember I was taken aback when I saw these op-eds. Is Donald Trump even trying to win? It's not a comfortable question when you think that your preferred candidate is not even trying to win. I mean, there was good reason to believe that John McCain wasn't even trying to win in his 2008 campaign against Barack Obama, and that he skipped the most powerful attack points against Barack Obama, such as his ties to Reverend Jeremiah Wright. So I was reading another Guardian article. I am a former IDF soldier, and I am an expert on genocide. And I went to Israel, and I was horrified what I saw there. That it appears that the Israeli government has genocidal intent with regard to the Palestinians. You wouldn't get to publish an op-ed in much of the mainstream media if you said, I'm a former IDF soldier and I'm an expert in genocide, and what Israel is doing in Gaza is not genocide. Right? The incentives go entirely towards Israel's committing genocide. So why is video displaying in shorts format, right, meaning vertically? Okay, so about a year ago, the default for live streaming moved to vertical because most people now consume YouTube videos on their phones. And so that's why the default for YouTube live streaming is now vertical. I would prefer to do it horizontally, but that requires more effort. And if I'm not using a gimbal, it looks really bad. Like it looks really jerky. And I'd love to use a gimbal, but that then destroys the comfort of the people around me. Nobody who's outside of live streaming likes walking around when other people are live streaming. And to use a gimbal, right, it's just way too socially disruptive. And I don't feel at ease walking around diminishing other people's comfort. Oh, so here's another trope that I notice in mainstream media coverage of Israel. So Israel will assassinate leaders of various terror groups, and will have various military successes, right? Would decimate Hamas, would decimate Hezbollah leadership, and then there's always this trope. Israel enjoyed success in assassinating XYZ enemy, but strategically it's not going to help Israel. Look, just killing terrorists is a good thing, right? Just killing people who planned and carried out the October 7, 2023 massacre of Israelis, just in and of itself, just killing those people is a good thing. Without regard to any particular strategy. Now, it's important to have strategy, and it is a worthy investigation. Do these targeted assassinations, act in Israel's strategic best interest? But it's such a trope. All right, that's this mainstream media reflex that Israel's targeted assassinations don't help the country. There's something barbaric about targeted assassinations that repels the news media. And that's because counterterrorism, such as targeted assassinations, is illicit from the perspective of most countries in the world, because most countries in the world sign on to an Leninist ethic of anti-imperialism. So if you sign on to Vladimir Ilyich Lenin's philosophy of anti-imperialism, that means that you can do anything against quote-unquote European imperialism, right? Any terrorism, any slaughter is justified. But then counterterrorism, counterinsurgency techniques such as targeted assassinations, right? You want to reduce those options as much as possible. So those groups such as the Palestinians and formerly the Viet Cong, who saw themselves as opposing colonialism, right? They're allowed to get away with murder. But much of the Western elite would be severe and would pay really close scrutiny to counterinsurgency, counterterrorism techniques. So it used to be that if you're not in uniform, you don't get any of the benefits. You don't get any of the benefits of the Geneva Conventions. But now So all this criticism of Israel not abiding by the Geneva Conventions when it's fighting terrorists who don't abide by the Geneva Conventions and who haven't signed on to the Geneva Conventions and are not traditionally entitled to any of the protections of the Geneva Conventions. So another trope in the mainstream media is how everything that Netanyahu does is for his own selfish interest and is against the interest of hostages. Oh, and another trope is that Israel does X, Y, Z, but it's not going to fulfill its strategic objectives, which its number one objective is to bring home the hostages. Well, that's not necessarily the number one strategic objective of Israel. You'd think that Israel's number one strategic objective would be to survive. And we've already seen how releasing Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, right, just leads to more slaughter of Israeli civilians. So Israel gave up thousands of Palestinian terrorists back to Palestine to free one lousy Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. And then these thousands of Palestinian terrorists, right, they go out and slaughter more Israeli civilians. And one of the Palestinians who was released was Yahya Sinjar, the leader of Hamas, the man who organized and directed the October 7th slaughter. So you'd think that Israel, by and large, would wise up to what a bad deal it is to release thousands and hundreds of Palestinian terrorists in exchange for a few hostages. So no, I don't think it should be Israel's number one strategic objective is to get the return of its hostages, if in so doing it diminishes its own security and safety, and it overall weakens the Jewish state rather than strengthens it. So a common trope I see in mainstream media coverage of Israel is how everything that Bibi Netanyahu does is for his own selfish political interests and is really against the best interests of Israel. And I'm sure there's a very strong argument to be made there, but you don't get much of a contrary perspective or any different perspective. It just seems to be the one dominating mainstream media narrative with regard to Bibi Netanyahu's choices. And ever since October 7, at which date, right, Bibi Netanyahu was Israel's prime minister and therefore deserving of much of the blame for October 7. But ever since that date, Bibi Netanyahu has become steadily more popular, and the primary plausible candidates for Israel's prime minister, aside from Bibi, have gotten steadily less popular. So it seems crazy that Israel would give up sovereignty over the Philadelphia corridor, right? That's the border between Gaza and Egypt, because we saw that Egyptian border guards. Okay, I got screaming homeless person behind me. And I'm trying to impart great wisdom on my live stream, and the screaming homeless are interrupting my spiritual insights. So Egyptian border guards would get paid something like $50 a month, so they were easy to bribe, and Gaza was able to bribe them and build all sorts of tunnels, and that's where Hamas got much of its weaponry through. And so a major reason that Egypt was so opposed to Israel going into that area of Gaza is Jaffa, I've forgotten the exact name, because it exposed the crummy job that Egypt had done. It would be embarrassing to Egypt because they essentially allowed Hamas to smuggle in unlimited amounts of weaponry through its border with Egypt. And so I just don't understand how Israel can give up sovereignty of the Philadelphia corridor. All right, Israel's got to be able to have sovereignty to guard against Hamas amassing more weaponry. And so I'm open to the perspective that Bibi Netanyahu has to go, that Bibi Netanyahu is just out for his own selfish interests, is just trying to extend the war to fulfill his own interests. But the uniformity of the mainstream media narrative against Bibi Netanyahu has made me come around somewhat to thinking that Netanyahu may be more aligned with Israel's best interests than what I otherwise thought. Right? You can overdo a point when there's just one overwhelming narrative that the mainstream media loathes Bibi Netanyahu and is trying to do everything they can to drive him out of power. And it sure seems like the Biden administration has made it a key part of their foreign policy to discredit Bibi Netanyahu and get a more left-wing government in Israel. G'day, UK. Touted, defiant embrace of Merry Christmas contrast against Kamala is essentially a Grinch. If only Trump could be on point, substantive, reasonable, as he was in this ad. After countless Harris ad, YouTube finally showed me a Trump ad late last night. Pretty good. Former president appeared to be speaking from Air Force One. So I also find it discouraging that Trump is thinking about replacing his campaign team. Right, this is a move that Kamala Harris has made repeatedly. Her own insecurity leads her, when she makes mistakes, to blame her team when it's really her fault. And Donald Trump has many of the same characteristics. Right, when Donald Trump screws up, he's very quick to blame his own team and to look to replace his own team, rather than take responsibilities for his own flaws. So I was listening to a Megyn Kelly interview from 8 days ago with Sky News Australia. She talked about how Mark Halperin believes that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz weren't sufficiently vetted, and you'll find a lot more damaging stories about Kamala and Tim in the days ahead.